Picture an ancient manuscript resting on a stone table. The light touching it doesn't come from the sun, but from an interior glow no visible source can explain. In the background, the ticking of a clock, but it doesn't count hours. It breathes, like a heart that listens more than it speaks. What if time isn't passing, but watching? This isn't a video. It's a fracture in time, a whisper between forgotten pages, a letter that was never mailed. Or maybe it was always meant for you. There are moments in history when silence speaks louder than 1,000 books. And there are men who, even surrounded by formulas, knew the soul isn't something you measure with equations. Isaac Newton is remembered as the architect of motion and gravity, but few dare to ask, what if his final obsession wasn't a formula, but a memory? In the final years of his life, Newton dove deep into forbidden manuscripts, apocryphal texts, alchemical symbols, and prophetic visions. What he couldn't publish, he wrote in secret, not for others, but for eternity, for those who know how to read time, the way you read a soul. Have you ever felt like you're living in two timelines at once? Like the outside world is moving fast, but something inside you stands completely still? That might be the real clock, not the one that counts seconds, but the one that counts silences. Time, Newton once wrote, isn't just duration, it's judgment. Not in the moralistic sense, but in the revelatory one. Time reveals what hasn't yet healed. It quiets what we're too afraid to hear. Some say Newton predicted the apocalypse. Others believe he tried to decipher the mind of God. But maybe. What he truly searched for was a mirror where time no longer moved, but became presence. This video is a listening ritual, an invitation to inner stillness, to a forgotten remembrance that time doesn't belong to us, it watches us. At the end, there won't be answers, but maybe you'll rediscover the question that's always been there, hidden, silent, waiting. What if Isaac Newton didn't just discover laws? What if he heard the soul of the cosmos? Now, breathe. The real time, the one that matters, is about to reveal itself. Imagine a body in motion, crossing streets, answering emails, meeting deadlines. Now imagine that inside this same body, a soul stands still. It doesn't follow, it watches. This is the silent split of our time. External speed, internal suspension. Maybe you've felt it, that sensation of always being slightly late for your own life, of checking every box but still feeling you never quite arrived, of keeping time, but losing direction. When the soul falls out of sync with human time, something breaks. But it doesn't shatter with noise. It fades, quietly. Isaac Newton, the father of classical physics, understood time in a way most textbooks forget. To him, time wasn't just a flow of seconds. It was a kind of moral backdrop to the universe. Not in the sense of guilt or punishment, but of revelation. Time, he believed, was the cosmos's quiet witness. Not a clock. A mirror. When Newton wrote about time, he wasn't only describing chronology, he was describing cosmic responsibility. A reckoning that doesn't use minutes, but meaning. Time, in his most secret writings, was a kind of consciousness. Watching, waiting, calling. And when the soul refuses to follow the rhythm of the world, what happens? Disconnection. That low, constant ache of being alive. But not quite here, of playing along, while part of you stands just outside the game. Maybe that's why so many feel exhausted, even in stillness. Why anxiety lingers, even without threat. Because something in you remembers a different time. A time that doesn't rush. A time that spirals inward, not forward. Newton hinted at this in his writings about the sensorium of God, a mysterious concept suggesting that the entire universe has awareness, that time itself is a kind of divine perception, not moral judgment, but soul exposure. A mirror held up to see who we are when we stop pretending. So here's the metaphor. Time isn't the line, it's the reflection, the one staring back as we try to look alive. This truth is uncomfortable Because it demands something rare in our world: a pause. And in a culture obsessed with velocity, pause feels like failure. But Newton didn't fear the pause. He cultivated it. He knew the real equation was never outside. It was within. So maybe your sorrow, your confusion, your quiet sense of being out of sync aren't flaws. Maybe they're clues, signals that your soul is trying to bring you back to something you forgot. You're not behind. You're listening. And sometimes, in a world that only shouts, listening is the bravest thing you can do. Real time doesn't rush you. It awakens you. And the soul's reckoning isn't punishment. It's remembrance. A call back to who you were before you hurried. There's a place where science and the sacred meet. Not a cathedral, not a lab, but a pause. That quiet space between a question and its answer. That's where Newton's God lived. Most remember Isaac Newton as the mind behind gravity, motion, and the mechanical universe. But behind his formulas was a man who, by candlelight, translated alchemical scrolls, who pored over prophecy, who believed the universe was more than particles. It was a language, a code, waiting to be remembered. Newton didn't see a contradiction between science and faith, because his faith wasn't religion. It was reverence, and his science wasn't cold, it was devotional. He believed in a divine intelligence that revealed itself not through dogma, but through pattern. Not in sermons, but in symmetry. Not in thunder, but in silence. This was a God that didn't judge, but revealed. A God who whispered through numbers, through light, through the void between things. A presence not confined to temples, but encrypted in the structure of reality. He called it the Supreme God, but what he really described was a mathematical mind, impersonal, infinite, conscious. And here lies the mystery. This God doesn't command, he invites. Not through miracles, but through meaning. Not with signs from above, but with subtle alignments below. Have you ever felt something larger watching over you? Not with eyes, but with presence, like something deeply ordered hiding behind the chaos? Maybe that's not faith, maybe it's memory. Newton saw God not as a being, but as a state of perception. An awareness that lives in ratios and radiance, in the silence between notes, in the breath between thoughts. This wasn't theology, it was intimacy with the fabric of reality. And maybe that's why so few find this God, because we search for him in noise, and he hides in the quiet. In his secret writings, Newton described a living universe, one where every atom was a sign, every law a reminder. Gravity, he thought, wasn't just a force. It was the echo of something deeper, a symbol that everything, even what seems separate, is always drawn back to its source. This echoes the mystics, the Essenes, the hidden codes of the Zohar. They all spoke of a divine pattern beneath what we see, and so did Newton, even if no one was listening. So what if God never left? What if he never was out there at all? What if he's been here all along, in ratios, in reflections, in the rhythm of your breath? The truth is, you are part of that code, not a mistake, but a symbol, a word in the sentence of the cosmos. Maybe that's why Newton kept so much to himself, because some truths can't be said, only heard. And the God he knew doesn't live in temples. He dwells in the silence between the laws. And if you learn to listen, you might realize he was never absent. You were just surrounded by too much noise. Some gifts don't arrive wrapped in beauty. Some feel more like burdens. Time is one of them. We're told it's a gift. But what if it's also a test? Have you ever felt like you're living the right way, but something inside still feels wrong? You follow the routine. You meet the deadlines. You check the boxes. But it's as if your soul has quietly stepped out of the room. That's the danger of chronological time. It works only for those who are awake, for those who are still asleep. Time becomes a veil that covers the memory of the soul, that numbs us with productivity but starves us of presence, that convinces us motion means meaning, Newton sensed this when he described time as absolute, not because it was fixed, but because it was real, even when we couldn't feel it. To him, time wasn't an invention of clocks. It was a hidden current beneath all matter. But he also knew there's a deeper time, one that doesn't pass. It waits. Ancient mystical traditions speak of this. They say time was fractured after humanity lost its center. That the real time, sacred time, is circular, spiraled, symbolic, and that linear time is exile. Exile from what? From wholeness, from the present, from the part of you that never left. Near-death experiences often speak of a suspended time, a moment where everything stops, but nothing is lost. A place outside of ours, where nothing hurries, but everything matters. In that stillness, people report a strange clarity. Life isn't counted in days, it's weighed in truth. Chronological time can't measure that, because it doesn't count presence. It only counts duration. So many of us live chronologically correct, but existentially absent. We meet expectations, but miss the encounter. Be careful with the time you were given. It's not just a gift. It might be a mirror. It might be asking you something you've been too busy to hear. Imagine for a moment that time isn't something that passes, but something that watches. What does it see in you? Not your appointments, not your schedule, but your silence, your longing, your forgetfulness. And what if that forgetfulness is the point? Because the soul doesn't live on the calendar. It lives in symbols, in feelings, in subtle repetitions. Here is a practice, a quiet ritual for a loud world. Sit still, close your eyes, and ask, what is my time trying to show me that I've been too afraid to see? Let the silence answer, not with words, but with a sensation, a memory, a presence. Because time, the true time, doesn't judge, it invites, it doesn't push, it reveals, and if ignored for too long, it doesn't punish, it simply fades. And in its absence, you lose the voice of your own soul. So be careful with the time you were given. It might be a veil, but behind the veil might be your real name. Some letters were never sent, others were delivered, but never understood. And then there are those that travel through time not as messages, but as memories. Among Newton's countless notebooks and manuscripts lie fragments that history rarely mentions. Margins filled with strange symbols, lines scribbled in secrecy, writings that have less to do with motion and mass, and more to do with eternity. Near the end of his life, Newton's work drifted far from science. He turned inward, toward prophecy, alchemy, hidden codes, toward time as something sacred, not as sequence, but as mystery. One letter, if it can be called that, has remained in the shadows. Not lost exactly, just unread, as if it wasn't meant for scholars or the church, but for someone who hadn't been born yet, maybe someone like you. In it, Newton doesn't describe the end of the world. He speaks of a return, a cycle folding back on itself. He writes not to warn, but to remind. He speaks of time not as a clock, but as a veil, and of a moment to come, when the veil would lift, not for everyone, but for those who feel with the part of themselves that has no language. It echoes the ancient mystics, the Essenes, the authors of the Zohar. They all knew revelation is not destruction, it's disclosure. Newton, like them, wasn't predicting. He was remembering. And within these fragments, nearly buried in the math, is a single phrase, almost too poetic to be noticed. Time is the veil of eternity, and number is its shadow. What does that mean? That maybe time is not a line, but a skin, and number is not calculation. It's symbol, every number you keep seeing, every 1111, 333, 222. What if they're not coincidences? What if they're echoes of that letter, whispering not to your mind, but to your memory? Because that's what this is. Not a prophecy, a memory. One written not in ink, but in silence. not on paper, but in patterns. What if the letter was never meant to be read? Because it's already unfolding in your life? Here is a technique, a meditative glimpse into symbolic time. Sit with yourself. Close your eyes. Picture your life as a thread. Events, losses, breakthroughs, moments of strange clarity. Now picture that thread curving, forming a circle, then a spiral, then disappearing into a single point. What remains? You. Not your history, not your timeline. Just you. Before the story. The lost letter was never lost. It was waiting. And if you've heard something in this, if something inside you stirred without knowing why, then maybe the letter has reached its reader, not a historian, not a theologian. You, because the real revelations don't come to the world. They come to the ones who are still enough to listen. Some questions don't seek answers, they seek remembrance. And few mysteries are as misunderstood, yet as intimate as time. We live immersed in it. We measure everything by it. But how much of it do we truly comprehend? We say time heals, that time flies, that time runs out. But maybe time does none of those things. Maybe it just reveals. Maybe it shows us where we haven't yet returned. To Isaac Newton, time was absolute, but not in the way we use that word now. He saw it as a reality beyond perception, something that existed not only beside us, but within us. Toward the end of his life, Newton began to suspect something deeper. That time had layers, not measured in seconds, but in memories, not explained by science, but felt in the soul. What if time, as we know it, is only the shadow cast by something eternal? A flicker on the wall, a reflection of a source we haven't yet touched. Carl Jung called it the eternal unconscious, a part of the psyche that doesn't move through linear time, but exists outside it, a space where all that has been, all that is, and all that will be, already exists, and in that place, the soul doesn't age, it simply remembers. Maybe time is how the soul becomes conscious of itself, not through history, but through symbols, through patterns, through dreams that keep returning. Modern physics flirts with the same idea, that time may not be fundamental, that beneath the ticking, there's a stillness, a field where everything is connected, and nothing ever really leaves. David Bohm called it the implicate order, a hidden structure behind the surface of reality, where time doesn't pass, it unfolds. If that's true, then maybe you're not moving forward. You're circling inward, every déjà vu, every uncanny coincidence, every chill down your spine when nothing visible has changed. What if those aren't oddities? What if they're echoes, not from the past, but from the eternal? In that space, you're not seeking answers. You're remembering something you already know. Newton's final writings seem to speak to that place, as if he wasn't writing for the 18th century, but for the part of you that's outside of time. Maybe he knew that truth doesn't travel forward. It spirals back. It waits until you're ready, because time was never the thing moving. It was the mirror. And eternity, it's not a destination. It's a tone, a frequency, one your soul still hears, even when you forget the words. So here's a final image. You're standing before an ancient mirror, but you don't see your reflection. You see a landscape, a memory you never lived, but that aches like it's yours. That's where time ends, and remembrance begins. Because time was never what passed, it was what stayed, and what stays is still inside you, right now, even here, at the end of this video, or maybe at the beginning. What if heaven isn't a place beyond time, but the memory of who you already are? And what if time is just how God reminds you? Now leave a sign. A wordless silence, so others will know you remembered. You heard it too, and you're still here. Let's return to the beginning, to the sound of a clock that doesn't measure hours but breathes, to a letter that was never mailed, because maybe it was always meant to arrive. Right now, you've walked through time like a landscape. You've moved through its hidden chambers, the soul's invisible reckoning, the God hiding in the silence, the veil that mimics a gift, the mirror disguised as prophecy, the shadow cast by something not yet understood. But what if time never was what they told us? What if each passing moment isn't a loss, but a call? What if the future isn't ahead of you, but inside? Isaac Newton's legacy may have been his laws, but his true gift might have been a warning, not written in textbooks, but whispered in symbols etched into the silence between his pages, a message not for the world, but for the ones still enough to hear. And maybe that one is you. Not because you have the answers, but because you felt the pull, that strange ache of something ancient waking inside you, that low, steady awareness that time isn't counting down. It's calling you back. Back to stillness, back to alignment, back to the part of you that was never far, just forgotten. So what if Newton's final letter wasn't about the end of the world, but the beginning of your remembrance? And what if you don't need to understand it to know it's yours? Because the truth is, there is no lost letter. There is only a letter waiting to be opened inside you, and the one who wrote it might have signed it in silence, but its meaning has never stopped breathing. So if your heart stirred while listening, if a single phrase felt like a memory, if the space between words held more weight than the words themselves, then the message arrived. It was never meant to explain, only to awaken. You're not late. You're not broken. You're not outside time. You are remembering, and maybe that's all time ever wanted from you. So if something ancient stirred within you, leave a sign, a dot, a pause, a silent echo, so others will know they're not alone, and neither are you.